Hi everyone, this is Sharon. For this month's design team project for Lydia at Raindrop Lila, I thought we would do a fun little craft with me session and make some of these envelopes. I've got two styles that I created, and each one only uses one sheet of paper. There's minimal gluing and stitching. They're really easy to put together, so I hope you will join me today. The first one that we're going to make is this little wallet style envelope. So I tied mine up with some baker's twine, and I made this little clasp along the side, and that opens up to reveal two pockets inside. And these have a simple closure with some slits that I cut in there, so those open up like that. And then inside I added these wonderful little tags. And these are tags that I made using Lydia's marbled cards and neutral tags, or nautical tags, I should say. I will put a link to the kits that I use down below. So she just came out with some vintage map kits, which I love, and some marbled vintage papers that have a nautical theme. So I made these two cards, and I just added these little French laundry labels at the top. And then on the back side, I backed them with some ledger paper. So those tucked in to there, and this is the one we'll be making today in our session. And then I also have this style envelope. So this is one that comes together really quickly as well using one sheet of paper. I added this pretty bow to the middle. It's kind of an envelope style pocket, and then in there, well, first of all, I embellished the back, so that's what that looks like. And then in there, I created these three tags. So these are made with Lydia's Savannah Grace collection. And she's got some tags in there, so I just printed her tags, cut those out. They come together really quickly. I backed these with some plain book page and did some stamping on there. And then I also made these little button cards, again from Savannah Grace, and I just added my own vintage buttons, back that so that there's some writing room on the back. So that one is that, and then this is the one we're going to be making today. So again, I've got the three tags in there, a ribbon on the front, and then a little bit of embellishment on the back. So I hope you will join me. So the first project we're going to make is this double wallet style envelope. And I was inspired to make this by this piece. I received a couple of these in the mail recently, and I just kept them, and I thought they would be fun to add into journals. It's a double pocket, and it's got these little slits to be used to put the flap in and hold that in place. I had one of these in a journal a couple of videos back, and someone asked me about doing a tutorial to make one of these, and I thought, sure, I can do that. I decided to make mine a little bit larger, and I also thought, well, if I fold this over, that would make kind of a cool wallet style envelope. So that's what we're going to make. This one I have tied up with string and a clasp. I just decided to add that. It's not necessary, but I've got this string that I tied around and this little kind of leather looking clasp on the side, and then it opens up like this, and I have the two flaps on the inside, and of course I tucked in the little journaling cards in the pockets. So let's step through how to make this. I've cut a piece of paper to size, and my paper, I think I'm gonna take my camera just up ever so slightly so you can see that a little better. Okay, so this piece of paper I printed double-sided. I printed on 8.5 by 11, but then I cut it out. So my length is 8 3/4 and 8 1/8 in height. I've got this map image on this side from Lydia's Vintage Map Kits, and then I backed it with this marble paper from the Marble Vintage Papers. And I just love how those go together. And one thing to keep in mind with these is when you start folding these, there's a part of it that's going to be right side up and a part of it that's going to be upside down. And so if you're using, like, you can use scrap paper for these, book pages, craft paper, whatever you want. But keep in mind that if you have a pattern that's going a certain way, one side will be upside down. Now I'm using these map images as kind of just a general background, and I don't care if they're upside down or not, so that doesn't bother me. So for our first step in folding, I thought it would be easiest to make my fold for my flaps first. And so I'm going to fold that down this way. And I know that the flaps that I did on this one are approximately 1.5 to 1 5/8. I really just eyeballed it to a depth that I liked. You want to make it fairly deep though, I mean not too shallow, because you have to be able to fit it into these slits to be able to close those flaps. So I've got this folded down, and I think that works out best to do that step first. And then secondly, open that back up and then take your bottom and then just fold it up to where that crease line is along the top here. That seemed to work well for me. And then once I have that folded up, then we can fold down this edge to give it a little bit more strength. And that also gives us a little bit more room between here to get our items into our pockets. So I'm going to fold this edge up close to a 1/2 inch, maybe between 3/8 and a 1/2 inch, something like that. And how much you fold that over will depend on how much of a gap you want between your flap and the top. So that looks pretty good right there. The only bit of gluing I'm going to do with this project is to glue this flap down. The rest of it is all just folding. I stitch my pockets down. You could certainly glue those down. That would be another glue step. You don't have to stitch them down. So I'm using art glitter glue. I just put it into this small glue bottle. So I'm just going to run a bead of that along here. I want to get it pretty close to the edge so that nothing gets caught on this lip when I'm pulling things in and out of the pockets. So just let that dry for a second. And wipe the glue off my mat. Okay, so we've got our flap glued down. Next, we'll work on creating these top 2 flaps. So the first thing I did for that was to fold this whole thing in half. So you can kind of see where your middle is and where your pockets are going to be. Okay, and then now where that middle crease is, I'm going to just cut straight down. And that's going to form our 2 flaps for our pockets. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to take each of these sides and fold them in half. Now I'm not going to crease it, I'm just going to fold it because I'm going to do a cut. And my cut is going to be from the center peak down to the bottom. Now I'm not going all the way to this corner here. I'm going to bring it up a little bit because that'll give me just a little bit of coverage for this. You'll see when I'm done cutting it. It just looks better, I think, than going all the way to the bottom. You could go all the way to the bottom if you want. So I'm going to start at this peak and go down here about maybe 3/8 to a 1/2 inch up from the corner. So I'm going to cut that. And then you'll see I've got these little sides for my flap because I didn't go all the way to the bottom. When you fold this over, that just covers this gap here a little bit, and you don't see the gap as much. So I kind of like that. So I'll do the same on this side. So I'll just fold this over in half. I think it works better for me to cut this way. And then I'm going to go for my peak and then down about a 1/2 inch from this corner. So now I've got my 2 flaps, and I don't like these peaked corners or peaked tops here, so I'm going to round those. And what I'm going to do for that is fold it in half again so that both sides, I'm going to cut them at the same time and they'll have the same shape. So I'm just going to come up here with my scissors and just kind of round that off a little bit. Just kind of eyeball it. Might take a couple tries to get it. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I kind of like that. Okay, so now our next step is to cut these little slits that we have. And I'm going to take this out so you can see. I've got 2 slits cut, and that's where our flap goes into. And actually, before I do that step, I notched the top of my pocket so I can get things in and out easier or pull them out easier. You don't have to. I've got a little punch board with a notch on it that I use that does this shape. You could use a circle punch or something like that. So what I'm going to do is cut a notch in each side. Try to get that centered. And then this side, just kind of eyeball that. Okay, so I've got my 2 notches in there. I've got my flaps. I think I'm going to just ink these up ever so slightly. So I'll bring in, I probably have enough ink on here already to just get rid of the white cuts on there. Okay. Now comes the fun part, cutting those little slits. It's probably the most difficult step in the project, but it's not bad at all. Okay, so I'm going to bring in this old cutting mat. I try to keep my black one as clean and free of cuts as possible, so I always use this little mat for cutting. So I've got a craft knife and a ruler. And I did this all pretty much eyeballing it. So if I put this up and my flaps down, I started my first cut about 1/8 of an inch below the bottom of my notch. I want to give a little bit of room in there. It's a good 1/8, but you can't go down too far or you'll be too far beyond your flaps to get them in, tucked into these. So here, I'll just stick that in there so you can kind of see the positioning of that. So in looking at this, I noticed that my flap at this point is about 1 inch from the edge on each side. So I went beyond that, so I had plenty of room to tuck my flap in. So I made my cuts about 5/8 of an inch from the edge of each side. And so each one is going to be a little bit different because if you cut it slightly different. So if I'm looking at this one and looking at this point, it's pretty close. It's maybe a little bit less than 1 inch from the edge, but I'm going to maybe take it about 1/2 inch from this fold here and this edge. And when I say take it 1/2 inch, I mean the first slit that I'm going to cut. So I'm going to come here, line this up, and I'll do both pockets right away at the same time. So I'm going to come down here and go about 1/8 of an inch below, maybe just slightly more than 1/8 of an inch below the bottom of my notch, here and here. Then I'm going to find the middle crease and then come in about 1/2 inch from there and cut my paper, stay close to the ruler, all the way across, maybe 5/8 to 1/2 inch from that side. Okay, I moved my ruler, but I was supposed to do both at the same time. So now this side I'm going to cut the same, trying not to move my ruler. Okay, let's take a look at these ones. Okay, so I've got a slit in there, a slit in there. We can test these out, make sure they're working okay, that you can slide your flaps in there without getting caught or binding or anything. That looks pretty good. Let's just fold this, get it where we want it. Okay, so now I'm going to make a second one about 1/4 inch down from there. So we will open this up again. I'm going to take my ruler, bring it down 1/4 inch from the other slits in there. And these I'm going to bring in just maybe 1/4 inch farther in on each side from the first one. So I'm going to, here's my first one, I'm going to come in 1/4 inch or so and cut. And then another 1/4 inch on this side, and then the same over here. I'm going to start here, come in 1/4 inch. Okay, so now we've got this little band here on each side that we can put our flaps into. So we got that one and this one, and I think that's going to work pretty good. Now, one thing I didn't mention earlier is for this project, I used a 32-pound paper. You could use cardstock, I think. It might be a little bit more difficult to fold or stick your flaps in here. Cardstock might be a little bit sturdier, but I probably wouldn't go too much lighter than a 32-pound paper, just to make sure it's sturdy enough for all of the wear and tear that might happen on these pockets, opening and closing. So, okay, we've got that part done. That was the hardest part, I think. Next, I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch down, over, and up on each side to form my 2 pockets. And like I said, you could also glue down the middle and then around the outside and achieve the same results. So I will be back. Okay, I've got my pockets stitched up. On this one I used red stitching because there's a fair amount of red in there, and I like the way that contrast looks. For this one, I picked up this kind of seafoam green thread. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a lot of that color in here, so I thought that blended better with this map. Now, one thing I did before I stitched these is I did decide to ink around all my edges. I just wanted more of sort of that grungy, time-worn wallet, seafaring wallet look, so I did do that. Let's see. The other thing I thought with my flaps, to keep these from binding and crashing into each other in this corner here, I'm just going to clip them a little bit on each side. So here, just going to clip off a little bit down to the corner, and then the same on this side, just to give them a little bit more room. There, that works better. And we'll just ink those edges. Okay. The next step is to do a little bit of embellishing because I just can't do a project without embellishing. So I added this little numeric label on the inside. I think I'm going to do the same for this one. So I've got this number. This is a Sam Poole stamp. I like to take her stamps or any numeric or word stamps, use some old book page cutoffs and make some labels out of those. This one I think I'll put down in this corner. It just adds a little bit of extra to the inside of your envelope. Okay, and then on this one on the outside, I took a couple of these ship images from probably either her cards or tags and just tore those out and added those to the outside. And so I grabbed this image, again, from one of her nautical kits or marble kits. I'm not sure which one, but I thought I would just sort of add that to this back side. And we can decide on a position. think down in this corner. So I'm just going to glue the back of that. And then on this front, I've got another ship image I thought I would tear out, and we could set that in the ocean. And let's see, where do we want to put you? I don't want to cover up the mermaid, so maybe right there, because we have our clasp coming on this side also. So I'm just going to grab some ink. Got a little heavy on that one. Just get that white edge off of there. Okay, and we can glue that on there. Okay, and then our last step will be to add this clasp. And I just like the way that looks with this kind of old style wallet. And I used, this is actually a hanging hot file folder, and I treated it to make it look like leather. And so I've got a piece of that I cut to size. I'm going to link a video tutorial where I show how I make this kind of leather look from hanging file folders. So let's, first of all, I cut the corners, so I'm just going to snip those first so they're not so peaked. Okay, and that's going to fit around here like that. And then I'm going to place an eyelet in there. Okay, so I'm going to grab my 1/4 inch punch and punch a hole kind of centered. Put my eyelet in there. Set that. That looks pretty good. And then we will glue this to the back side and leave the front free. So I'm just going to put some glue on this back side. Kind of center that. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Now we just have to put our entire piece together. So for in my flaps, for this one, I created these 2 tags using one of her nautical kits. And I just added, on the other ones, I added these labels to the top and backed them with some ledger paper. And these I added some ticking scraps and just stapled those on, and then added some ledger to the back side. So I'm going to tuck those in my pocket. And I made them before I put the tops on, so they might be a little snug. Okay, and then we're going to tuck our flaps into the little closures here. There. And now I cut a piece of baker's twine like I did use for my other one, and we're just going to thread that through. And wrap it around a couple of times. And tie it up. And there we have our double pocket wallet style envelope. I hope you enjoyed that. Stay tuned for the other one. This next envelope project is easy peasy. There's a minimal amount of gluing, no stitching, and it's going to come together really quickly. I've seen quite a number of people make this style of pocket or envelope made from envelopes and other things. I think this version is really simple and easy, so let's get started. So I've got a piece of paper that I printed an image from Lydia's Savannah Grace kit, really pretty lacy. And then on this back side, I just put some script from one of her French document kits. And that is just to really line the inside so it's not stark white in there. This I printed on 8.5 by 11 and then cut it down to 10.5 by 7. Yeah, 10.5 by 7. So our first step in making this envelope is to bring these sides in and crease them and make sure that they are both the same width. Now I'm going to use the grid on my mat here to help me with that. You could measure and mark with a pencil, however you want to do it. But I find that this probably works about the best. So I'm just going to line it up with my line. And then that looks pretty good. That's there and that's there. Now, if you don't get them even, it might look kind of wonky because you kind of want these side flaps to be the same width. So that's our first step. Then our second step is to take this and fold it up exactly in half. So I'm just lining this up at the top and folding it in half. So that gives us something like this. Now what we're going to do is to cut out these corners right here and here because we don't need those. So I'm just going to cut along my crease line and maybe just angle it in ever so slightly here because this is going to fold up to the inside. So I'm going to just cut up to that fold in the corner and then same on this side. And then we're going to cut over here straight across and this side. Okay, so now we have something that looks like this. And then I'm going to make sure these are straight. Okay, so then the next step is to form the peaks for our side flaps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this all back out and then fold this up and just in half. I'm not going to crease all the way across. I'm just going to find this halfway point. So I'm going to fold that in half. And I'm going to go from this peak to this peak. And I think it works better to cut it this way. And then I'll do the same on this side. Okay, so turn this around. So now we have our side flaps. And with this one, again, I don't like a real peaked corner, so I'm just going to come here and snip this back ever so slightly. Just have something that's a little bit flatter on there. Okay, so then the next step is to fold this down to form your pocket. Now on my example here, I folded this down right to here, so it's maybe about a 1/2 inch up from the peak. Now you can make that higher, you can make it lower, you can put it wherever you want really. I want to keep it high enough so that I can tuck things in here easily and it's going to hold them. So you probably don't want to fold it below your peaks in the middle, but you could, you know, keep it up higher if you want. I'll make this one similar to the other one, so I'm just going to eyeball that, maybe make it a 1/2 inch higher than my peaks. And I'll fold that to the inside. And then the only gluing in this project is to just glue this flap down. It creates a nice sturdy top to your pocket. So I'm just going to take my art glitter glue and glue that flap down. Okay, and similar to the other project, I think I'm going to ink around my edges just to give it a little bit more of a vintage worn look. So let's see, we don't need to do the inside of the flaps, I don't think. I'm just going to do this top edge on the inside. And I think that's going to be it for the inside, and then we'll do around the outside. Okay, so we've got our edges all inked. And our next step is going to be to add some holes here and some reinforcers as a place to put our ribbon. So I'm just going to take my 1/4 inch punch and punch a hole there. And then on this side, okay, and then I'm going to use some hole reinforcers that I have, and I thought these silver ones would look nice with this pale green. So I'm just going to add that there, just to give it a little bit more reinforcement for our ribbon. And I'm going to put some on the back side as well. Okay, then the next step is to thread our ribbon. I just pulled this floral sari silk piece that I have. So I'll pull that through. And this was a remnant. It's pretty short. I don't know that I'm going to get like a double loop bow in there. Well, let's just try a knot. And then another knot. And then I think I'm just going to cut my edges. This one required a little bit of fiddling, which is fine. Okay, so I like the way that looks. And then similar to my sample, I have these 3 tags that I stuck in there. And so I also made some for this one from her Savannah Grace kit, which again, these come together so quickly because I just printed them, cut them out, and I backed them with some plain book page and added a little stamp at the top, so we've got some nice writing room. This one I made from one of her button cards, and I just stitched on some buttons with some thread and then backed it, so you can still use it for writing on the back. And these I'm just going to tuck in my pocket. And I think that's a really sweet little envelope. Now this one I did a little embellishing on the back with some labels, so let's do that on here too. I grabbed this label. This is not Lydia's. I think this is the Paper Cameo. So I'm going to just set that here on the back side just to add a little bit of extra. That's always the fun part, I think, is adding all the fun little embellishments. Can never tell which way is up on these. I think it's this way. Just going to set that right there. And it just adds a little bit of interest to the back side of the pocket. So there we have our fun and easy and pretty one-page pocket. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you coming along with me. I hope you make some of these as well. And until next time, bye-bye.